All right, gentlemen, go ahead.
Welcome, everyone. This is our live stream Q&A about the upcoming course, Einstein and Spinoza's God. I'm joined with my good friend, co-laborer, collaborator, and a person who is doing a lot to make this happen for all of you, Ethan Say. So welcome, Ethan.
Hey, thanks a lot, John. Yeah, I'm excited about this because obviously this is the first course that is going out on our new platform, the Lectern, which is on Teachable. Registration has been open for a while now, and it's beautiful. We have 30 students signed up for the course right
Right.
now, which is
Good.
super, super exciting. And this course, I remember we put out like a poll a few months ago with a few options for courses.
Mhm.
And by an overwhelming majority, Einstein and Spinoza's God won that poll.
Mhm.
And I'm actually kind of curious. Like it's one of those things which I looked at and I went, wow, this is it's exciting, it's novel, and I'm kind of curious, like what inspired for you the creation of this course?
Oh, so what inspired? Well, there was a couple of things, and they all came together. One, my overarching, um, most powerful vocational inspiration right now is the responding to the advent of the sacred, which is happening right now, and more people are talking about this. You'll hear some people using my language, the advent of the sacred. You'll hear some people talk about the return to religion. You'll hear some people talk about the great awakening or the spiritual awakening that's happening right now. I've been, uh, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right word. I have experienced myself as especially responsive to this, even sensitive to it, um, in the in the good sense of the word. And I thought that a figure who was very much pertinent to that was a figure who I've only frequently mentioned in passing in everything else I've done, who's had a profound influence on me, is Spinoza. Spinoza is at the heart of the first great scientific revolution, and he's a follower of Descartes. He's deeply influential, and he's wrestling with um, basically the advent of modernity and the way it is massively accelerating the meaning crisis. And he is trying to afford a new form of spirituality that is consonant with the emerging science. But it occurred to me that for many people, Spinoza is a fairly obscure figure. They might have heard the name, he's in the background somewhere, and he's been demonized for very long. Spinoza is like the atheist and all this stuff. And then I realized, but a person they've heard a lot of, and a person who did this. Powler has this book where he talks about the how Einstein changed God, and introduced this new thing which he calls psi religion, which is kind of an integration of science and religion. And of course, it wasn't just Einstein. Heisenberg is quoting the Bhagavad Gita. And Oppenheimer is quoting the Bhagavad Gita too, famously in the movie, right? Now I am become death, the killer of worlds. And so there's this new sort of psi religion associated with Einstein, and of course Einstein also is a person who falls cleanly and explicitly between our so-called exhaustive categories. He refused consistently to call himself an atheist or even to agree with atheists. Um, but he also refused to acknowledge or even find reasonable or plausible the idea of a personal God, the standard God of standard theism. And so this religious view he has, and he does have a view of God, seems to be other than the way modernity has divided things up into this, and I'm going to use this word in a pejorative sense, this myth of the conflict between science and religion. One of the things we'll look at in the course is that is largely a fable. The people who've done actual serious history, like Harrison, show that the relationship between science and religion since the advent of modernity has been actually one of deep interpenetration, often mutual affordance and motivation and mutual self-correction. But anyways, Einstein challenges that in a powerful way. He's deeply influential. He's deeply famous And he's revered. He has achieved almost a saintly status. And then the thing about Einstein is his God is explicitly the God, he says it, the God of Spinoza. He is deeply a follower, a devotee of Spinoza. So I thought, well, here's a way of getting people introduced to Spinoza's God through a person who shared that God, Einstein, although there's important differences between them, and that also would be a way of introducing a way of thinking that is getting us beyond the gridlock conceptual frameworks we're in and the mythological no, I don't want to use mythological, the mythic in the sense of false narrative we have about conflict. And these two figures are trying to point beyond that. And I think figures who are trying to point beyond our straitjacket mentality um, are the ones that could help make us most responsive to the advent of the sacred. So Einstein and Spinoza's God.
Yeah, I'm hearing that as like you pointing sort of or pulling apart the science and the faith poles and then drawing across the 8 weeks an argument for that which transcends atheism, personal theism, the bifurcation of science and religion, and trying to sort of move us in a way which, like, I suppose it's a, would you call it integration? Is that what it would be?
I like to use the term stereoscopic depth perception, the way you have your left and right visual field,
Yeah.
and you look through them and they get fused, but not just smushed. They get fused into seeing into a new dimension that you couldn't see before. And this is very important, especially when because one of my critiques, maybe criticisms, critiques of Einstein is he doesn't fully get Spinoza's non-dualism. Spinoza's frequently, well, for a very long time, he was represented as a pantheist, and then he's been represented as a materialist, and he's been represented as very recently as an absolute idealist. And what that means is he's actually a non-dualist. Because the position that can gather all the same evidence that each one of these positions individually has is non-dualism. So when he says God or nature, he doesn't mean God is another way of saying nature. He doesn't mean it's a choice. He means like left and right visual field. And you look through God and nature to see something beyond. That God or nature category is part of the religion science divide, the fact value divide, all these divisions that we have sort of straitjacket ourselves with. Dichotomies, in fact.
Yeah, and false dichotomies is what I'm
Yes,
hearing you say. So, okay, so uh, uh, there are a few questions which I want to kind of follow up on, to sort of flesh out the ground, and then in the later half of this Q&A, I want to try and get through as many of my questions as possible so that we can move to the audience questions.
yes,
But one of the things which I was going through in the reading list that you had sent, and I'd love to ask you questions about each of the 5 books that we'll be going
sure.
through over the course of the
Happy.
course as well, is this thing. Einstein had this quote which I put in the newsletter this week because it was such an amazing thing. That Einstein said, "I am of the opinion that all the finer speculations in the realm of science spring from a deep religious feeling, and that without such feeling, they would not be fruitful."
Mhm.
And this is Einstein and Religion by Max Jammer, which is like the second book that we go through.
Yes, that's right.
So, something strikes me about when I read this quote is, suddenly I saw Einstein as a person, not as an abstract structure of ideas.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
think for someone coming, maybe from the scientific worldview, you know, these, whether it's figures like Hawking or Einstein, there's a way in which they become a kind of icon for the ideas that they represent. Whereas what
Yes.
I'm hearing in you articulating in this course is like, well, let's not forget their people. they they
Yes.
also have a people there. And so to that end, like, why is it important to for you to have picked the books that you did? Because we do A Theory of Everything That Matters
Mhm.
by Alistair McGrath, and then we
Yes.
do Einstein and Religion, and then we do Spinoza science. Can you talk through maybe this the first one, a theory of everything that matters first?
So McGrath is somebody I've recently been introduced to. I'm doing a course at the University of Toronto that I'm called the Cognitive Science of Religion, a fourth year seminar course, so at a graduate level. I'm also turning it currently into a book called I'm working on. So my graduate students are helping. Well, they're undergrads, but they're at the graduate level. They're helping me with the book. It's called Realizing the Relevance of Religion. And McGrath he picks up this challenge to the myth, the fable. Maybe I'll use fable for something that is not true. The fable of the deep conflict between science and religion that was given to us by the Enlightenment, and actually goes through following up on Harrison. And then he does this with the territories of reason. And he wants to show that our notion of rationality also has to be we've got, and I've been doing a lot of work on this, the Enlightenment notion of rationality as computation, as algorithmic, and how that is all completely breaking down. And that when that when that straitjacket, when we shake free from that straitjacket, right, our connectedness to reality and our overcoming of illusion become much more central to our understanding of ratio, proportioning our cognition and our attention, where we get the word rationality from. And that is very much overlaps and interpenetrates with religio, this sense of profound connectedness to what's most real and cutting through illusion within and without. And now you can hear I'm starting to talk in a way that sounds to many people's ears religiously, and that's the intent. And then so he's a really important author, and then he writes this book. It's like, thank you, on on Einstein. And what he does is he's a very astute philosopher. So he gets the philosophy of science, and he goes through and he lays out for us what Einstein's theories are, why they matter. And but then he does what Einstein does with it. What you just did. He doesn't leave it as an abstract set of ideas. He puts us behind. He presences the perspective of Einstein, looking through that lens, and trying to get something much more like a religious worldview. What is a worldview that can properly inspire and aspire us to achieve wisdom and more meaning? And so that book is, I thought, a great introduction because it does exactly what you're talking about. The Jammer book is really good because everybody else cites this book with good reasons. And careful about sort of the history and what is Einstein's view on God and religion. So that book is, doing something very central for us, and very, very careful. And I will refer to a whole bunch of other books, some of the recommended books along the way, so that we can be sure. Because the problem with Einstein is there's a lot of stuff misattributed to him that he didn't actually say or believe. And so a jammer will really help us be very clear about what we can have high confidence in. And then the Russell book is, when we're looking at the Russell book, that's a really important book because many people
This is
don't
Spinoza
understand.
science, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the third book you mentioned? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. The Russell book is very important because um, many people don't understand that, like this current person here, Spinoza has multiple ways of knowing, a theory of multiple kinds of knowing. One is imaginal, and the next is propositional, and then the third, scientia intuitiva, is this profound, participatory, mystical at one ment that affords blessedness, transformative experience. And the problem with, again, so two things that Einstein doesn't seem to fully get from Spinoza are that there are these multiple ways of knowing, and that you transcend the propositional into scientia intuitiva. Einstein's trying to get that with this notion of feeling, but he doesn't get it or work it out as clearly as Spinoza does. And he's also not getting the non-dualism, because the scientia intuitiva discloses the non-dualism. And part of what we're going to do is look at how deeply Neoplatonic Spinoza is. He's deeply influenced by Leon Hebrio, late Renaissance Neoplatonist, and the Kabbalah, which is deeply infused with Neoplatonism. And that's why we do the Carlyle book as well, Spinoza's Religion, because she gets this idea of profound participation in ultimate reality as the key that Spinoza is engaging in.
So I want to just put a pin on that really quickly while I invite everybody who is watching at the moment. Thank you all for joining us. Please spend time. You can key in some questions into the chat, and then we'll get to them in short order. Now to kind of like spin around this. Yeah, so there are two, in a way, two Einstein books, and there are three sort of Spinoza-centric books. We have Spinoza Science, that's by Russell.
Yeah,
Then there's Spinoza's Radical Theology,
yeah,
and then there is Spinoza's Religion.
yep.
Right. So this is I wanna just ask first to, if you can weave them into one, that'd be great. To clarify for folks who might not be familiar what Scantia Intuitiva is, how would you describe that
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
familiarity?
yeah, yeah.
And then
So
the other one, which is sorry, John, but the other one is, why is it important for us now today, when science has grown considerably since the Enlightenment, that we be able to ground it in I suppose concert with philosophy and with religion.
right. Okay. So first of all, Scantia Intuitiva. Sorry for I shouldn't be presumptuous. I'm teaching a course, so people don't know this stuff. I apologize, everyone. Please don't take that to be academic arrogance. Please take that to be enthusiastic involvement with the material. I'm a little too close to it. I hope you'll take it that way, please. Um, So Scansia Intuitiva, this actually happened, and this goes towards something you were saying earlier, Ethan, about not looking at the ideas, but looking through the eyes of the person who generated them. So I was going through, I had read uh, the sort of the improvement of the intellect and a bunch of other stuff. And then I was working my way through, these are texts by Spinoza, and then I was working my way through his magnus opus, the Ethics. And this is a it's like, and it's deliberately crafted this way. You're reading, it's like reading Euclid's Elements. You've got axioms and theorems and proofs and lemmas, and you're going through, and it's like, it's really, and it's, and you have to go back and think about each premise, each proposition, and each proof, and you do this slogging, and you're going along. Uh, and then I don't know how else to describe it. There was this transformation in my perspectival and participatory knowing, where I was no longer looking at the ideas, I was seeing the world the way Spinoza did. It was adverbial. I was looking Spinozistically. And all the premises of the argument, I could see all of the premises in the argument and all of the argument in each premise. And because of the way the ethics is written, I could see all of reality in the non-duality and all of the non-duality in each element of reality, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, to quote Blake. And then and that's to see. And then what that does is that Scientia Intuitiva allows you to go into participation. This is Carlyle's word, not mine. Participation in God, this profound participatory knowing, a kind of profound identification with ultimate reality that Spinoza calls blessedness. And that is completely realizable. And I use that word, as you know, very deliberately, realizable within a scientific worldview, a profound blessedness. Listen to the religious language he uses, a profound sense of being connected to what is most real in a way that matters to you the most it can possibly matter to you. And that, of course, is conducive to the cultivation of wisdom, meaning in life, the two dimensions that you enhance, that are the enhancement of religio, that make life worth living in the face of our finitude and our failures and our frustrations and our foolishness. And this is what Spinoza is directly offering. And then Einstein basically says, when the second revolution is coming, hey, we need this again. Because we're in danger of losing all of this. And then here's the deeper thing he keeps pointing at, but he can't quite articulate, which comes out in Frank Gleiser and my friend Evan Thompson's book, The Blind Spot. Science actually depends on being grounded in that religio, that connectedness, in order to afford the cultivation of the overcoming of self-deception and the love for what is more and more real. So science depends on that. And that's part of the argument I'm going to be making.
And so there's a question here from George, which I think really keys quite well into what you've just mentioned, which is, hey John, do you know which philosophers, if any, are popular amongst current theoretical physicists? And this opens up to that larger question of how will studying philosophy or being engaged with philosophers in the way that you've just named, so from a perspectival standpoint, actually, what does it afford the scientific worldview? What does it afford the practice of science?
Oh, I can't remember the name of it. Maybe Ethan, you can take a look for it. It's a new book by a physicist called The One. And he is basically deeply impressed by, as I am, with the failure of the reductionist framework in physics. What am I talking about here? And this is where Spinoza and Einstein are deeply relevant. Einstein, as you know, started the quest for the grand unified field theory, the quest, and notice I'm using a religious term here, the quest to find the one behind relativity and quantum mechanics. And of course, he failed. And then what we've had is we've had 70 years or so of failure. Now, I'm enough of a cognitive scientist to say when you get repeated failure after multiple theoretical formulations, string theory being the most recent failure, I think quantum loop gravity is about to fail too because it failed to be disconfirmed in some important experiments, etc. When you get you should look, this is called the notice invariance heuristic. When you keep formulating a problem and you keep failing to solve it, step back and look for what you're not changing in your problem formulation. This is called the notice invariance heuristic. It predicts insight. It's seminal work by Kaplan and Simon in 1990, experiment, in fact, and thereafter, but by other people. So what is invariant in all of these physicists' approach? A reductive strategy. The idea that we will ultimately reduce everything down to the bottom. Now, that has failed. And that is failing there, and it's failed in cognitive science, the attempt to reduce everything down to the brain. Um, and what that does is it makes you step back and think, well, first the temptation is, well, and this is an ancient temptation. It's all emanates from the top down. The problem is that's just those arguments are exactly symmetrical. If it fails going all the way bottom, it fails coming all the way from the top. And so what you get is the movement towards the one, which is it's emergent all the way up, emanating all the way down. You have to reformulate how to look at reality in a fundamental way. Now, that's what the physicists are arguing for, and they're deeply influenced. I can't remember the author of the book, The One. He's explicitly influenced by by Neoplatonism and ancient Greek philosophy. Many physicists are being influenced by Whitehead because Whitehead is trying to do exactly the same thing. Whitehead is a modern Neoplatonist trying to integrate a Neoplatonic framework with modern physics, post-Einsteinian physics. And so what that means is and of course in cognitive science, Gleiser and Frank, who co-wrote the book with Evan, are both physicists. One's a cosmologist, one's a physicist, and they're deeply influenced by Merleau-Ponty. All of these things are converging on this idea of a fundamental shift in our ontology towards an ontology that is very much presaged by what we see in Spinoza's attempt to reintegrate. I'm not saying it's perfect. We will criticize it. We will critique it. But in Spinoza's attempt to reintegrate Neoplatonism and the scientific worldview. And then, of course, what is on offer, especially in The Blind Spot by Frank Gleiser and Thompson, is that will help to, and this is convergent with my work, and Evan admits that clearly and explicitly, some of the videos on my channel, is a way of deeply responding to the meaning crisis and affording a proper apprehension and appreciation of the advent of the sacred.
So just to follow up on your question, the one is, I hope I'm not butchering this name too badly, Heinrich Pass, P-A-S. I think that's the one that you're referring to.
It's a recent book, 2023.
Yes. How an ancient idea holds the future of physics.
Exactly my point. Yes.
Yeah. So this is, yeah, Heinrich, accented A-S.
Right.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I want to bring kind of like myself a little bit in here to segue into another question that come up. So I come from more of a practice background,
Sure.
and it's as a three-time dropout from school. Like it took a long time for me to get back into sort of like the academic world to even pick up reading again. And so there is a certain degree of intimidation, and I mean that in like an intellectual sense, with exactly what you're talking about with Spinoza and this almost like Euclidean reason. This
Hmm.
just it's just it's logic and it's proof and it's beautiful in that regard. And I want to I think offer myself up as a kind of way of
Yeah.
how, when it comes to this course, right? How much scaffolding is there for folks like who maybe are not familiar with either physics and science or philosophy? How does it scaffold into this material? And this is where Elizabeth's question sort of pops in, which is when we talk about non-dualism, and if the course is moving us into, I suppose, a communion with non-dualism, what does that mean in practice? What does that mean in the world? So that it's not just theory, it's
Oh,
lived.
very much. Okay. So first of all, scaffolding. Nobody's going to be reading either any papers by Einstein or any of Spinoza's work. And I all of my all of my hope uh, is that the books we read and the lectures I give will prepare people, and I'll even give people sort of recommendations for how to read your way into Spinoza. I will do that. Don't start with the ethics. End with the ethics, for example, and some recommended books to read along the way if people are interested. So there's going to be a lot of scaffolding. I'm not going to presume any knowledge of physics. That's why we're reading the McGrath book. I'm not going to presume any knowledge of philosophy, and that's what my job is. And that's why we're reading the books I've chosen for us. In terms of practice, one of my criticisms of both of these thinkers is exactly the fact that although Einstein somewhat incoherently and Spinoza very clearly are pointing beyond propositional inferential practice, they're both still caught up in the Enlightenment straitjacket of propositional tyranny to a degree, in that um, there's some hints of what the practices should be in Spinoza. And then Einstein, I think, in something of a performative contradiction, was very resistant personally to participating in any kind of religious rituals. He had a significant distaste for them because he had a very really sort of obsolete already in his day, but more so now, notion that all these rituals were myths, and the myths were just sort of bad science where people were trying to explain the world in a narrative fashion. And we've long since abandoned that rather simplistic account of what's going on in myth and what's going on in ritual. Um, so that's where hopefully without trespassing or without angering the gods of hubris, I don't want any nemesis after me or any furies. um that's where I come in. My job is, especially when we move into Carlisle, and because I talked to her about this, because I did have a conversation with her on my channel about like what does this actually mean in terms of practice, and you need all the stuff around ritual. And of course I'm talking about ritual in the course I'm teaching at U of T. I'm going to be talking about it, a course I'm doing on Jonathan's platform on the cognitive science of ritual. A reappraisal of what do we mean by ritual, because unfortunately we have a very jaundiced view of it given to us by the Protestant Reformation and by one of its late proponents, an atheistic Jew named Sigmund Freud, who taught us to think that rituals are neurotic compulsions. And so we need to break out of all of that. That's my job. And so one of the ways in which I find both of these thinkers, who I hold in high regard, I think very highly of Einstein. I revere Spinoza. I nevertheless think that that is a serious gap. And I think once we go through Carlyle's book, we'll see that, well, but we this immediately invokes the question, what do I practice? Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is one of those things which excite me. It's like it's not just an academic course, and I think that's not necessarily always obvious from just the page and by looking at the curriculum. There is an element of how it shows up in life, how it changes the orientation that one might take to the world. So,
Can I say one
and I'm
thing about
wondering,
that?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, part of what you need to do is, how can I catch that vision where I see the world spinozistically so that it transfers systematically to every aspect of my life and transforms systemically every layer of my person? That's what ritual does. Captures the vision and then regularly and reliably trains it to transfer and to transform.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something which I've sort of noticed where, say, when I was very scientifically sort of leaning, my God, dinner conversations were really boring for the
Yeah.
other people. No, I know for me,
Yeah.
it's like here I am trying to tell them, theories about cogsi and whatever, and it was just losing folks. And so I was getting disillusioned from that, but not completely, because it obviously had value, which is why I'm still here. And then at the same time, it's like I also was not one to preach very much. I was excommunicated from a church when I was very early on, because I
You
was
and,
doing I was
you and
doing street
Spinoza.
magic.
You and Spinoza.
Yeah, yeah, very different levels. But I was doing street magic at the time. I was in my young teens and practicing mentalism, which is, what Darren Brown calls it being honest about your dishonesty, right?
Yeah.
And so there's sort of like all sorts of illusions and mental heuristics. And I was excommunicated for practicing the dark arts, I believe. Practicing
Ah,
black
yeah.
magic is what it was called,
Okay.
right? So that there was something about the non-dualism which actually was very homing, and something that I've noticed is that it's shown up in different kinds of domains, where it's like being able to hold dualities with grace and
Mhm.
to inquire into them, right? The practice of this active inquiry has actually been really, really affording. And so there was a question sort of like around the kinds of heuristics and the kinds of ways in which we interact with folks and the practice of that, in Emmanuel's question, which is, he asked, John, in another video a few years ago, you said that most people misunderstand the meaning of Occam's razor, but never
Mhm.
elaborated, and it made me curious. Can you enlighten me as an example of how we might use certain kinds of heuristics and philosophies to
So Occam's razor is being wielded on behalf of nominalism. Nominalism is an attempt to cut out from your ontology as much as you possibly can everything that is not a substance in the Aristotelian sense of the word, not stuff, but individually existing things. And so what that means for Occam is that ultimately what exists, like that, even so, we think of this as a marker, we think of these as markers, but being a marker is not a property of this, according to Occam. That is, seeing a pattern between these is not in the world. All that's in there, out in the world, are raw individuals. And he might have causal relations, but even that seems to be questioned by Occam. And of course, David Hume will famously finish that Occam's razor and cut away causation. So why do I say people wield it, not realizing that almost all the entities of science, like scientific laws, causal relations, evolution, any proposal of real patterns in the world will be equally cut away by Occam's razor as the angels and other mythological or religious entities that they think they can cut away with Occam's razor. Occam's razor, as you are trying to cut away religion, it's a two-sided razor that is digging into your scientific hand and cutting it away as you think you're cutting away the supernatural or the metaphysical. So you either wield it coherently and with consistency, the way Ockham did, and you push towards profound nominalism, and that cuts away everything we would understand as modern science. Or you say, oh, well, I'll make exceptions, and then you have to give me an independent justification while you make exceptions for your scientific real patterns and not for any others that people are talking about. And then that's a whole different argument. So you then are back to, well, what are the rational, what do we have good reason and good evidence? What are the real patterns? What aren't the real patterns? And then that's the same problem in religion and in science. What are the real patterns? What are not the real patterns? When are people trying to overcome self-deception? When are they bullshitting themselves, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm, yeah, yeah, and I'm hearing in this sort of what you had named in an earlier course, which is Beyond Nihilism, you're going through Tillich and talking about what Spinoza called the intellectual love of God,
Yes.
I believe, right? And so Neri asked this question of like, John, are you going to review Spinoza's notion of amor de intellectualis in the course?
Oh,
Actually, I'm more interested in the relationship of that with your reference slash use to love, philia, eros, agape.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Very,
because I
very
think
much.
you've demonstrated why Occam's razor is not the best tool for the job.
Uh, in answer to your question, yes, the intellectual love of God is going to be really, really important. And it's really alive for me right now. I didn't get a chance. I was trying to bring it up in a recent conversation I had. No, it wasn't a conversation. It was genuine dialogos with Jonathan Pajot and my good friend Jordan Hall. By the way, he's okay, everyone. For those of you wondering if Jordan's okay, he's okay. He and his family are fine, and their house wasn't damaged either. So thank God for that. But and I briefly was trying to get to the point about Spinoza, and we got sidetracked because I was trying to bring up Spinoza has this idea about the intellectual love of God, and I will make use of Tillich in that when we talk about that. So thank you for the segue, because Tillich talks about Spinoza's idea that the only thing that can overcome our profound egocentrism, which is a form of love, is to love is to get a love for God, which makes us reality centric. I use the Greek word. I use the word onto. It comes from Greek being ontos. So rather, ego is a Greek word too, by the way. So that's why I'm doing this. Rather than egocentric, we are ontocentric. And that means we have to love reality. We have to really love reality more than we love ourselves. This is one of Spinoza's profound insight until it gets it right. That's the intellectual love of God. Now, when we hear the word intellectual, we are misled because we hear, well, an intellectual is, a person who is enamored with ideas and, blah. That's not, Spinoza is using the word intellectus the way he's using it for the Neoplatonic term nous, noesis. It is not what we commonly think of as intellectual, which is this propositional spinning of ideas. Nous it is a profound insight into reality. It is a perspectival kind of knowing. It is a profound kind of perspectival insight, and then it is a kind of love. It is a deep participatory binding, uh, identification with. So that's what's meant by the intellectual love of God. And this came up for me in my discussion with Jonathan and Jordan because I was trying to make the point. Uh, they asked me quite fairly, and I'm not trying to argue against them. We three are going to talk. Paul Vanderklay, sorry, Paul Vanderklay, Jonathan, and I are going to talk on Paul's channel soon. So I will give them a very clear opportunity to respond to this. But they were saying, well, does the one love you? And Mike Spinoza, I said, well, I don't want that because I'm actually trying to completely and permanently turn the arrow away from egocentrism. I'm trying to love God without secretly wanting God to love me back. because that's ultimately instrumentalizing God. That's making God not ultimate, but a tool for what really matters, which is my egocentric existence. So for Spinoza, the intellectual love of God carries with it that one moves towards a non-duality in which one is in, he's explicitly said, the wise person who has intellectual love of God never endeavors to have God love him in return. That's profound, I think. And notice how that, I can hear a lot of people, and please bear with me. If I don't mean to be offensive, I'm trying to be provocative, not offensive. For many people, that's like, oh, I don't like that because, I'm in this religion or that religion because, I want God to love me. And it's like, yes. And so what you get is, well, instead of having God love you, can you participate in agape? Can you participate in agape? Can you be embraced and afforded by it? And it's not really doesn't make sense to say that agape loves you. That's like saying that motion moves. That doesn't make any sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can, if that's what you mean, I experience agape profoundly and I dwell deeply within it. And therefore I love reality much more than I love myself. Um, I think that then um, is consonant. And the reason I say that is because Paul's definition of a Christian is somebody who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. He doesn't say because secretly that will mean Jesus will love them, right? They just trust
Mm.
Jesus but more than. And so I think that the intellectual love of God is a pivot point. It is the linchpin of what Spinoza is on about. And I think Einstein is groping towards it when he's talking about the religious feeling and the feeling of the mysterious and how it motivates us. He's not just talking about awe. He's trying to talk about something that transforms us, but he doesn't quite get, or at least he never tries to explicitly. He's reading Spinoza, but he doesn't come to the point where he gets the centrality of the intellectual love of God.
Mm. Mm.
But
Yeah, there's something. Mm.
for me, the intellectual love of God, this is the jewel. This is the jewel in Spinoza. If we can come to live the intellectus, I'll say the Latin rather than our word, love of God, the nous, the noesis, the noetic. That's the one I'm going. If we can come to the noetic love, the noetic participation in God that so reorients us that we're ontocentric, we are now properly sensitive and responsive and responsible to the advent of the sacred. This is why Spinoza is key to the philosophical Silk Road.
Mm. So I'm hearing that a lot of the echoes of Charlie Hunnam's book, right, Spinoza's Radical Theology, where I
Yes.
think this is part of it. Can you say more about the argument you're making in that book, and then to just sort of tag on to the end, you talk about the intellectual love of God, and I have a question sort of like at the back of my mind, which is, if not, then what? Right? So what's the in I don't mean to sound scary about this or preachy, but like what's the quote unquote consequence, right? What's the fall? Right?
Uh,
Yeah.
okay. So notice the books I've chosen for Spinoza: Science, Theology, Religion. That's intended. I'm trying to give you all of these and show you that they're deeply interpenetrating. Because as we abandon all of the Enlightenment straitjacket, all of its debilitating dichotomies that dictate how we see things, all of these things that we separate become massively interpenetrating. And that's what I want to try and show. The radical theology is exactly that. It's a theology that challenges our standard theology. I mean, hence the title of the book. But it's radical not in just in the sense of revolutionary. It's radical in that it's trying to get us to rethink to our core what it is to be related to the sacred. It's radical in both going to the origin and revolutionary, because radical radius to the center. It's going to the core this way, but it's also reorienting us the way the revolutionary is trying to get us to revision and reorient to a new way of seeing and being in the world. And so The point about this is to get that about the theology. Spinoza's theology isn't another theology along with the other theologies. This is why I get angry. I mean, in an academic good sense, when people well, Spinoza's a pantheist, and then they just put him into the category framework given to us by the Enlightenment about what, first of all, the category of religion is given to us by the Enlightenment. Most cultures don't have it. You don't even have it really before the Enlightenment. This idea that there's this specific thing we can sort of carve out that is a substance in the Aristotelian sense that can independently exist on its own and can be studied on its own, called religion, right? And then what we can do is we can create a nice, neat taxonomy. And these are theists, and these are atheists, and these are pantheists, and these are panentheists, and here's how they all work. And notice their belief systems. I'm rejecting all of that, and part of why that's
Mm.
what the project of the radical theology is.
So, uh, I have like two conflicting thoughts. One is ask the next question, but then the other one is also, right, that we don't want to categorize religion to become a Aristotelian substance that we can point at and go, let's look at that thing, when
That's
it's
right.
actually rightly proportioned, part of how we look at anything.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly.
Okay,
There's
so
a deep,
this,
there's a deep continuity between religious religio, which is religio oriented towards what is ultimately real, ultimately transformative, ultimately orienting, therefore sacred, and non-religious religio. So let me give you just a quick example. Therapy is a non-religious ritual. You do imaginal serious play with perspectival and participatory knowing in order to help people overcome self-deception and become reasonably reintegrated with themselves and their world. That is to enhance religio through ritual. That's what therapy is. That's how therapy works. All of the beliefs, look, pay attention to this, everyone. The dodo effect. There is no deep difference in the efficaciousness of all these theoretical frameworks for psychotherapy. This is a reliable empirical result. All that predicts success is the ritual of rapport between the therapist and the client. All the propositional systems, well, maybe indispensable to give people a way of talking to each other, are not where the work is being done. The work is at the level of the ritual of religio. That's what rapport is. It's the connectedness, the perspectival and participatory connectedness. In the same way, at the level of all the propositions, that's not where the religions are ultimately working. They're working at the level of religio. Therapy is not ultimately oriented towards the sacred, the ultimate. Religious ritual is basically oriented towards the ultimate. There's a deep
mm,
continuity. And so you have to see the lines through which you're attending and deeply participating in a sports event, how you've undergone therapy, what happens to you in transformative education and religio. You can't cleanly, and science, genuine science, the practice of science. I'm not meaning the propositions, I'm talking about the practice of science. You can't cleanly separate them from each other. They all interpenetrate and share a common set of fundamental processes, principles, and patterns. I just wanted to really amplify what you said because it was really an important point.
I'm reminded of there was a Norwegian playwright that I got to study when I was in my 20s, and he was famous for having stared at a beetle for 4 hours, and that sort of struck me as, you know me, I always go into sort of the phenomenological sort of
Yeah.
personal piece in the practice of science. Like that's a scientific endeavor for a 5-year-old to do,
Yes.
right? To engage so deeply with an entity that is in the same world, right? And to apply a particular attitude, a particular character to it. And so, this again, this is sort of tuning into like the phenomenological, the character level, the developmental layer. When we're talking about the unconditional love applied to God, right? So non-instrumentally, I don't mind it, right? Don't mind not being loved back by God. What kind of person would one have to become in order to be able to love God without expecting to be loved in return? And that's a character question.
Yeah, and that goes towards a question, a second half of your previous question that I didn't get around to, at least not explicitly, which is what happens if we don't do this? And the proposal, I mean, Einstein's proposal is that science and religion will both suffer profoundly. And that's his proposal. And then Spinoza gives us a different account and brings it back to what your question is, our character. Well, what'll happen is we will, and now I'm going to use this word with I want you to put a lot of force behind it, and I'm going to use it in a technical sense. We will be the prisoners of our own and other people's foolishness. That is what we will live. A life of blessedness for Spinoza is a life of freedom. Now, this is something we'll talk about in the course. Spinoza does not believe in freedom of the will. Neither do I. I think that is a dichotomous way of trying to understand what freedom is. And it comes from the problems of the Enlightenment and the fact value dichotomy and the is-ought dichotomy and all kinds of other problems. The problem with that is like fact value, just to give people a hint. Is relevance a fact or a value? It's both. And every attempt you get at trying to get at facts requires you judging relevance. You can't separate them. Is rational a description of the fact of somebody or also an evaluation of the kind of person they are? Oh, it's both. So rational relevance realization, which is at the heart of science, it says actually when you're doing this, you're beneath, beyond, before the fact value dichotomy and dualism that we think cuts up reality in some way. Um, and so when you don't live the life of blessedness, you have a character in which you are imprisoned. And this is where Spinoza starts to sound like the Buddha. The Buddha said, like the ocean has one taste, no matter where you dip in it, you'll get the taste of salt. My teaching has one flavor. No matter where you dip in it, you'll find the flavor of liberation. Right? The liberation from dukkha, from self-destructive, self-deceptive uh, behavior, from parasitic processing. If we do not do this, what Spinoza is saying is our character will be one in which our character will be weak. And I'm including myself in this. I'm not standing outside and pointing at everybody else. Okay? I'm including myself in this criticism. Right? Our character will be weak and we will be imprisoned. We will lead a life of compulsive foolishness. Look, the difference between foolishness and love is love, right? Let's do it the other way around. Love is addictive. Sorry, foolishness is addictive compulsion. You keep doing the same damn thing over and over again. Why do I keep doing this destructive things in my romantic relationships? Why do I keep smoking? What, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's addictive compulsion. And we have little ones and we have huge ones and they form networks. Love, beauty, reason are about voluntary necessity. They are about compelling but not compulsive calls to us. Reason doesn't it's not compulsive, but you find it compelling in that sense of I'm freely choosing it and I want to. The way love is compelling, I'm freely choosing it and I want to. Or the beautiful, it's compelling me to look at it, but I'm freely choosing this. I want to be doing this, and I don't feel like I'm losing my agency. I feel like my agency is being enhanced. The only antidote to foolishness is love, reason, beauty. And that's what Spinoza is giving us. And if you turn away from that, you fall prey to compulsive addiction.
On that last bit about beauty, it's independent. It strikes me as being independent from personal preference. So
Exactly. Good.
one day,
This is Iris Murdoch, Sovereignty of the Good.
yeah,
Beauty unselfs you. Beauty unselfs you. Sorry for interrupting, but this is and she's a Neoplatonist through and through. And this is Spinoza's point. Yes, it unselfs you. which is different
Yeah, yeah,
from what we think beauty is, where beauty is, this is Hans' critique, saving beauty. We think beauty is that which is easily gratifying to us. That's not beauty. Beauty unselfs you in a radical way.
yeah. Yeah, in fact, it often overturns what one previously might assume is dislikable or
Yes.
disgusting. So, I remember again being a young'un, and I was walking down Orchard Road, is one of the main shopping streets in Singapore, and my foot had just like I was about to hit the floor, and then it stopped. Like, I don't know why it stopped, and I lifted my foot and I looked down, and I saw the most bizarre thing, the decapitated head of a bird that was
Oh,
in the middle of a pathway. And it I remember just sort of like putting my foot aside, and I stood there, and I looked at it. There was something about it that called to me, because it was bizarre, because there was something that was shining forth. I could feel disgust, but that was not so important. It was something like, how does that arrive here, and the iridescence of the feather, and there
yeah.
was something about
Wow.
it which is
Yeah.
like the macabre revealed the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I don't, it's not like I can agree or disagree with, like, oh, this thing happened, but I'm talking about the phenomenological
Yeah.
call of something beautiful, even
Yes.
in its
Yeah.
death. So that struck me. Now,
The
just
Japanese have
well,
this notion of wabe, right? Wabe,
yes,
where it's the imperfections, or Leonard Cohen, it's the crack that it's the crack in everything that lets the light shine through. Yes.
yes. And so we're almost at time, and I want to just ask one question. This is not completely procedural, but it is pedagogical and curatorial. So this is the first live course that we're doing on the lectern. There's gonna be more. How does Einstein and Spinoza's God lay a foundation, if at all? Just so I don't want to lead you anywhere, but why is this important for a kind of foundation for future courses coming forward on the lectern? How do you see this being the first step of something moving forward over the next year or 2 or 3, however?
Because I think this is about this fundamental reoriging of ourselves. I don't mean our genealogical or temporal origin. I mean, like when you the origin of a map, like where you are, it reorigins us, it reorients us, it re-astends us, it points us. That's what ostension means, right? So we take a different stance towards reality. We're opened up to it in the right way. So it's doing that fundamental thing that I think is, for example, the next course is going to be the cognitive science of imagination, and we will need that fundamental metanoia, the reorienting, reestending, the meta noesis, noetic, right? The noetic love of God. We will need that in order to properly have the standpoint. Listen to the word, from which and the proper stance, so we can get into what the imagination means and does. And one of the interesting things is Spinoza actually talks a lot about the imagination, and we'll touch upon that here and there, especially when we talk about the three kinds of knowing. He was initially interpreted as saying something very negative about imagination, and there's definitely criticisms. And he's influenced by the Protestantism of his time and Calvin's deep demonization of the imagination, which of course then the romantics come back and do the exact opposite and they deify it. Don't demonize or deify any of your faculties, please. Look, if take one heuristic away, don't do that. Don't demonize or deify any of your faculties. They all can lead you to flourish, and they can all seriously F you up. So just don't do that. Um, but more recently, Genevieve Lloyd and others have said, no, Spinoza has a much more subtle nuance. There's a positive role for imagination in everything that Spinoza is doing, because like Plato, who seems to criticize imagery, Spinoza relies on imagery repeatedly throughout in important ways. Like he talks about the face of the cosmos. And it's this important imaginal thing for him. We'll talk about that. So this course reorients us and gets us to start to break out of the Enlightenment straitjacket, and gives us the metanoia that will help us get into the depths in the next course, for example, the cognitive science of the imagination.
Thank you, John. Yes. So on the back of that, we're just going to round off today's Q&A with a few announcements. So if any of what you've heard the past hour has been exciting to you and piqued your interest, I would invite you to consider going to lectern.teachable.com, Lectern .teachable, teachable.com, to enroll for Einstein and Spinoza's God. Registration is open now till October 17th. The course starts October 18th, every Friday, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. We still have a lot of spaces available. And right now, and this will be standard practice for all courses, students always get a discount. So if you're currently an enrolled student, we will just ask you to submit a proof of student status, and then we'll give you a discount off of the course live. There are also bundles available. So if you have a friend or 2 friends or 3 friends, there is a joint discount for everybody to sign up together. And then that will be really, really helpful for engaging with the course material as a group. They will be 2-hour lectures. Well, it will be 2-hour sessions per Friday, 1-hour lecture and 1-hour seminar Q&A.
An hour and 15 minutes lecture, 45 minutes Q&A. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then there will also be something new that we're adding is critical essays and reflective essays. They will be a set of guided questions. These are optional, but encouraged. They've been written and curated in such a way to invite a kind of processing and argumentation between the recommended reading authors, as well as with your own thought, and they're designed to educe, to draw out your ideas and your understanding of the material. So that's what's on offer. John, do you have any last words before we close the stream?
No, I just wanted to thank you for doing what you always do with such mastery. You're a maestro. And I want to thank people behind who are doing all the work, Eric and Ben, for example, in particular, who are doing a lot to make this happen. And also, as always, Christopher Mastropietro, who is in the background, making a lot of things happen for all of us. So I wanted to just give appropriate credit and thanks to all of those people. So thank you very much, my dear friends.
And thank you, everybody, for watching, for your wonderful questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Hope to see you soon.
Yes.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.